Good morning and welcome into another episode of Big Talk College Sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler alongside my partner Sam Sprunger. Sam, how are we doing?
It's Friday. I know I started almost every week saying it's Friday, it's a good day, but you know what? When it's true, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right. Everybody's got a good reason to feel a little high heading into the weekend.
That's right.
And of course, we're right now in the middle of the crossover storm of Big Ten sports football, men's basketball, women's basketball. Heck, if hockey's your thing, that's rolling right now
Yeah.
as well. So, a lot to get into here in this episode. And maybe we start off with Big Ten football because this past weekend we saw a couple of games that certainly were pretty telling. One, we had a top five battle from Happy Valley between Ohio State and Penn State. It was one of those games where the storylines or narratives around it, whether it be true or maybe there's a dose of truth or just completely a fallacy, but it was Ryan Day versus James Franklin. Something's got to give. So
Yep.
both of these coaches have struggled a little bit in some of those big games. That's the narrative anyway. And somebody was going to have to win it. Somebody was going to have to lose it. Ohio State wins it 20-13. What did you take away from this one?
I took it away that Ohio State's defense is legit, and the fact that they gave up 30, what was it, 31 against Oregon, shows you how good Oregon is as well because uh, the only touchdown Penn State scored was on a defensive touchdown. So it's not
Right.
like the offense only produced 6 points against Ohio State. And the Penn State offense is not a bad offense at all. And the fact that they were shut down to only produce 6 points and lose by 7, I took away that Ohio State, their game against Oregon at that time was an anomaly to give up that many points. That and Oregon's that good.
And I think that's fair. And you talk about Ohio State's defense. I mean, Penn State got within the 5 yard line twice, right? And
Twice.
came away
Yeah.
with no points there.
Right.
I just, that's the kind of thing I think if you're Penn State, you're really kind of kicking yourself for because here you had the opportunities. It could have been the first win over Ohio State in 8 years. Opportunities were there. You just didn't finish, which doesn't help the narrative that I said a little bit ago. Not that necessarily I fully subscribe to the narrative,
Right.
um, but like there is a dose of for Penn State, like they've won a couple of bowl games or whatever, but they need one of these kinds of
Yeah.
wins at some point. I say needs, and it's just to kind of fulfill the appetite that maybe exists with fans and whatnot. But like overall, I was hearing this conversation a little bit nationally, so I kind of wanted to poke into it as well,
Hmm.
Sam. But people were talking about, what do you do if you're Penn State with James Franklin? And I'm like, you keep him because you're probably going to be in the college football playoff almost every year.
Yeah.
Like this program is healthy and great. And he brought him back from a really desperate place.
Oh, for sure.
Um I like I to me, I don't understand the James Franklin hot seat conversation. I think you can rightfully be kind of bummed or frustrated that you haven't gotten that win over Ohio State in 8 years. That's fair. But like you're in a position where in a 12-team playoff, Penn State's going to be in it this
Yeah.
year, and years moving forward, they're either going to be right there on the door, like knocking the door, or they're going to be in. Like this is a healthy program. They just can't climb that final step.
If you remember, well, might have been really young at the time, but when Steve Young won his Super Bowl with the 49ers, they played the Chargers, and I don't know if you were even alive or if you were very young at that point. I don't
Okay,
remember the year. It was in
look
the
it up.
90s, so I know it was a little while ago. But when they had secured the win, there was still time left in the game, but they showed the sidelines and there was somebody acting like they were ripping the monkey off of Steve Young's back. That's what it's going to be like when Penn State does finally break through and beat one of the Michigans or Ohio States in those big games. Now, the Michigan one this year, if they would have played it, it's not the same. But
Right.
you get that top 10 Michigan team and Penn State comes into the top 10 or Ohio State, they're going to beat one of those guys and it's going to be almost like, "Oh, we can really do this." Okay, take a deep sigh and we're back.
Yep.
And I don't coming from a guy who supports a team that's 1-7 right now and has really struggled to find a great coach after Joe Tiller, and you had Jeff Brom in there who was a really good coach, but he didn't have the ties to where he was going to stay. You kind of
Hmm.
knew it was just a matter of time before either Louisville or a bigger program came along and snagged him away, because Purdue's not a stopping point. Penn State is. Penn State's a place you can make a career and say, look what we're doing at Penn State. And I think James Franklin is the perfect one in there, because you're right. They were coming from a dumpster fire of a program prior to Bill O'Brien taking over for the 1 year that he did, and then all of a sudden gone. And you know, where do you go? James Franklin was the perfect one, I think.
No, I completely sign off on that as well. And my big thing too, if we switch the perspective to Ohio State, look, Ohio State wins this game. They needed to win this game. If they
Sure.
didn't win this game, Columbus would have just been upside down. Like
Oh yes.
it would have been a problem. Which is kind of crazy, but again, it is also a bit of the byproduct of college athletics today, where you talk about a reported roster of $20+ million. Like,
Right.
you do have to win it when the business and the money has become this transparent to the public. Like, it ramps up the pressure, and call it fair or not fair, but that is the reality of college athletics
Yep.
today. But for Ohio State, I mean, they win this game. You talked about the defense. I still don't know, and I don't know if this is just me taking previous years of distrust of what this program is. I don't know right now if I drop them in the playoff, if they're able to win this. I still don't necessarily have a full-fledged confidence in Ohio State, and not for any other reason than I think just because what the previous years and the scars have been. Like, if you look at the talent, you look at the defense, it's a lot of rock solid stuff that the Buckeyes
Sure.
have. But there's something within me that's like, I don't know come playoff time if I trust that to be able to win it all. And I was curious what you feel.
I honestly I feel differently this year than I have any other year that Ohio State
Okay.
was being considered, and it's because of how they have one loss right now,
Hmm.
and it's to Oregon, who's the number one team in the country. The best kind of loss you could have. Okay, they played them to 1 point. If they would have had 2 more seconds on the clock, they would have had at least an attempt at winning that game. And
Hmm.
so I think I don't discount your thought that maybe there just isn't the 100%, but we're going back on what's happened in the past rather than saying what's happening right now.
And I fully subscribe to that. That's what's happening here. But as a counterpoint, shortly after that loss to Oregon, they nearly lost to Nebraska.
Yeah,
Like, they survive at
right.
21-17. So, like, that's the kind of thing I think that keeps like popping out of from the back of my head. I'm like, I don't know if I'm supposed to trust you 100% or not. Where, like, Oregon, I really trust. I have a lot of confidence in Oregon.
Hmm.
Maybe it's because opponents along the way that they should dismantle, they've dismantled. But like with Ohio State, like that Nebraska game kind of leers there, and I think about that often. And that's probably not fair on my part, but that is something
No,
that's existing.
I don't necessarily say you're wrong on that, because look at what they did against UCLA last week. I mean,
Right.
you don't lose to a team that's 1-7 at the time, or 1-6 or whatever at the time, if you're back. I
Hmm.
think they've still got a lot of question marks. But I think what it was is the Cornhuskers got into Columbus and put forward a great performance, whereas the next week they kind of stuck their thumb in a light socket and fried themselves right
Right.
after they did the Ohio State thing right after they got dismantled at IU. Then they come into Columbus and actually perform pretty well. I mean,
Yep.
and it's that means to me that they've got the pieces, they're just not fully clicking. So I think Nebraska is an anomaly, that they're going to lose to bad teams, but they're going to really compete with good ones at the same time.
And we talked just a moment there about Nebraska's last few weeks, and you brought up the loss to UCLA. Nebraska got off to such a hot start, and they've been sitting at 5 wins ever since. Like,
Yeah.
They have to become bowl eligible, right? They have to get to win 6, but it hasn't quite happened yet.
Well, and you sure would think so, anyways, because you at the time we were like, well, that's a foregone conclusion. You know,
Right.
they were 5-1, and they've subsequently lost every week since. It doesn't get any easier this week. It doesn't get any easier the week after, except for they host Wisconsin rather than having to go to Wisconsin. They play USC in Los Angeles this week, or no, they've got the week off this week. I'm sorry, the 16th
Correct.
is when they
Yes.
play
Yep.
USC. And then wrap up with Iowa, and we see what Iowa did to Wisconsin. So you're wondering which Jekyll and Hyde Iowa team shows up there too. So yes, you would think absolutely they're going to get one of those three. You just can't be 100% positive on it though.
No, I completely agree. Let's switch
Their
over
best
to
bet was UCLA
no, I
to get
agree.
that sixth.
Completely agreed.
Yeah.
If we switch over to a team that's rising, Minnesota. They're coming off a
Yes.
win against number 24 Illinois. They are bowl eligible now. They're 6-3. And do you remember at the beginning of the season they had the missed field goal against North Carolina that could have won it, but still ended with fireworks anyway in a mishap. They had the controversial loss to Michigan with the end of the game, the onside kick that was recovered, but
Yep.
an official blew it offsides, but it wasn't offsides. Um,
Still
there was
baffles me
talk.
that that's not reviewable.
I know, I agree.
I mean, you've got a camera right there. You can see if they're crossed. But
We can tell he was wrong pretty quickly after
yeah, right.
the call was made.
Right.
But there was talk at that time. I remember of, do you think PJ Fleck survives? Do you think he's on the hot seat? And I remember at the time thinking, boy, that seems a little knee jerky. I mean, given
Yeah.
what like in terms of or relative comparisons of what Minnesota football has as resources and everything else, I think he's done a fine job. And now they've ripped off however many wins in a row, and they're 6-3. They've ripped off 4 wins in a row. They're 6-3, and Minnesota's not just playing for a bowl game, but like they could finish here with a couple more W's, and it's pretty incredible how Minnesota turned this thing around.
Yeah. Tony and I talked about this last week. It's really funny in a strange way if you think about it. They are literally 2 plays away from being a one-loss team, and now all of a sudden you may be talking about IU, Minnesota, and Penn State, as potential. Now, I'm not saying all of them are going to make it because Penn State and Minnesota still play, and so that's PJ Fleck though just blows my mind at how good of a coach he is with what he's got.
Yep.
And 6-3, while some people are like, ooh, 6-3, he's 6-3 with a team that we didn't know what in the world they were going to have. We
Correct.
didn't know what they were going to be able to do. We didn't know where their offense was going to come from. We weren't sure how their defense would be. And you know what? Their defense is good enough. I know that's an unusual way to compliment something, but they're good enough to supplement what their offense is doing and get more wins than they are losses. It's really, and you know what? They wouldn't necessarily have won that game against Michigan necessarily, but they didn't even get the opportunity to try to drive down.
Yeah.
And that's the confusion as to why can't that be reviewed. I really don't understand how you can't review something that is so definitive of whether or not somebody's offsides. I don't get it.
Like that one's not a judgment. We're not talking about pass interference
Right.
of like how you kind of have to weigh, and it comes down to the individual. It's a pretty blatant thing.
Was it catchable? Was it, this, that,
Right.
or the other thing? Was he offsides or not?
Right. No, I'm
But Minnesota
completely with you.
is one of my surprises when it comes. IU, obviously, it's a national surprise, but in the Big Ten, it's definitely, to me, Minnesota is probably, they're sitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th, tied for 5th with Iowa, technically behind Iowa because they lost to them, but still, you didn't envision Minnesota being in that top half of the conference. Most didn't, anyways.
And especially after the start of the season. I mean, the way that
they were at 2-3 at one point.
Yeah. Like it's incredible. It
Yeah.
really is incredible.
Yeah.
You had dropped the name Michigan a couple of moments ago when we were talking about Minnesota, Michigan. Let's go ahead back to
Let's not
last
pick it
week.
up.
Number number one, Oregon goes to the Big House, beats Michigan 38-17, and it just seems like the Ducks right now are just a buzzsaw running through anybody they come against in the Big Ten.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And I don't know if you saw, I saw a post about Dan Lanning calling a timeout near the end of the game and gathering his guys around and saying, "Look, this is what I told you about." He wanted Oregon to be so definitively put such a definitive point on that game. He wanted his guys to see the Michigan fans leaving. Now, to me, that's part of the game. You get motivate however you want to motivate. Now, I've also seen people say, "Well, you beat up on a team that lost their head coach, their da 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 da, all these players." It doesn't matter. It's still Michigan, and they're the defending national champions. Even if they've got 4 losses, does not matter. They're still at this time the defending national champions, and he wanted to show those guys what you can do to a team that has what they have right now. And I think they are a buzzsaw. I would be shocked if somebody played within 10 points of them through the rest of the regular season. And then, honestly, the way they're playing, I think at this point they're my favorite to win it.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, and that's the thing too. Like we were talking about earlier, I do feel confidence in Oregon.
Yeah,
I do feel like this year's a little bit different than years past where you had an overwhelming Georgia or Alabama prior to last year,
right,
where you said there's a team that's clearly the best team in the country. Like I don't
right.
think that necessarily exists this year. And so I like Oregon too. I'm with you. I don't think Oregon's head and shoulders above some of those other teams,
No.
but I would maybe favor them as well at this point if you had to ask me to pick a winner.
With the way they're playing, I mean, they beat Boise State. Granted, it's the second game of the season that took them the last second field goal, but Boise State's no joke. You know, right now they're in the playoff with the
Mhm.
with the standings, and so for them to have wins over 2 playoff teams at this point, now, I'm sure there's more teams. I haven't even looked to see who's beaten who, but Oregon to have number 4, I think, is what Ohio State is, maybe 6 or
Mhm.
3. I mean, 3 or 4. You got them. You've got the game against Boise State. That is an impressive resume on your
Yep.
wins. On your wins.
No, I completely agree. I do want to hop to a couple other games from this
Sure.
past week before we move to the future. Your Purdue Boilermakers almost got it done. They were so close. They go to overtime with Northwestern, but Northwestern prevails 26-20.
I don't understand, and I get that hey, maybe our defense isn't doing the greatest, but you'd held Northwestern to 20 points. Take the points, at least the attempt at the points in overtime, and make them score a touchdown to win. Here, all they had to do was kick a field goal because Purdue went for it on 4th down and didn't get it. So therefore, they turned the ball over and didn't have any points to show in overtime. At least take the attempt to put the pressure on the other team. I'm not saying always go that way. There are times and places for it, but at that point, when you're at that time 1-6, 0-4 in the Big Ten, you need a win. You desperately need a win because you know what's happening next week. You're coming into Ohio State week. You've got to travel to the Shoe in Columbus, get a win, or at least put yourself into position. I just don't understand sometimes
The logic.
the play choice and the logic. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's fair. I also do want to shift here real quick too to UCLA.
Yeah.
Because we talked about that they beat Nebraska and we kind of say what's wrong with Nebraska. I kind of want to point this out to the listeners because this kind of went by my head, over my head. But UCLA, okay, they opened the season with a win over Hawaii. Close game, 3-point win, whatever. They
Right.
get shellacked by Indiana. And I think that's when we all kind of wrote UCLA off. We're like, oh, you lost by 30 points to Indiana. This is just a
Right.
bad football team. And then we learned that Indiana is actually really good. We never really came back to UCLA. Since then, UCLA lost to a number 16 LSU team. They lost to the best team in the country right now, Oregon. and they lost to Penn State. They played those games 3 in a row after
Yeah.
losing to Indiana. And if
Yeah.
you consider Indiana now, that's a top 10 team. So
So
if you
4 in a
look
row.
if you look at UCLA's schedule, right after the opening game, they had 4 teams that were top 10, top 15 in the country to go against. They lost them all, so we never really came back to refocus on UCLA.
Then you
Then they
lost to
lose.
Minnesota.
Minnesota's next. They lose to Minnesota. We just sang Minnesota's praises. After that, they got wins against Rutgers and Nebraska. So my point is
Both on the road
UCLA
too.
quietly gets to 3-5, yeah, on the road. Maybe UCLA is not as bad as we thought. Maybe they just lost a game to an Indiana team that we didn't know was Indiana at the time, and they've played a bunch of tough teams since. Look, if you look at the rest of their schedule, let's see if we think they have a chance for bowl eligibility. They have
How many wins they
Iowa
got?
next.
How
They
many
have
did they
3
have?
right now, so
3.
they need 3
Okay.
of the next 4. They got Iowa at home. They go to Washington. They host USC, which USC has not been that impressive either. USC's
Right.
at 4 and
That's a
5,
winnable game.
and then they host Fresno State. Like, if Deshaun Foster finds a way after being what were they 1 and 5 to get to a bowl game, it's a pretty good year 1 at UCLA.
I don't feel much confidence in them getting 3 of the 4 of these, though. I really don't. It's
That's
not
fair.
impossible, but I just don't. The way Washington's playing, they just got done beating USC.
Yep.
They've beaten Michigan. Granted, Michigan's down, so is USC, but those are still big wins with a team that we thought was going to be hugely down as well.
Yeah.
So I think Washington at Washington is going to be a difficult one for UCLA to go to and get. I think USC's winnable. I think Fresno is probably winnable too. I have no idea what they have done. The anomaly is which Jekyll and Hyde Iowa team do you get, and you host them. So there's maybe your one that you say, okay, that one maybe not, but they could win that one. And then the other 3 are definitely winnable, but I don't know. I just don't.
No, it's fair.
UCLA's been so hit or miss on things too. Now, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like we just talked about, they had 4 straight games against highly ranked teams, and then Minnesota, who's overachieving. So therefore, those are not. You don't want to say good losses, but they're not bad losses. They didn't necessarily lose to somebody they shouldn't have lost to. And to me, they've beaten at least one team in Nebraska that they shouldn't have beaten. So that they have the possibility of it. I just don't know that of those 4 what they get.
No, I think that's completely fair. But that Iowa UCLA game is tonight. That's a
Yes.
9:00 kick. So that's going to be one to look out for. And Iowa just finished rolling Wisconsin 42-10. That was one that you're like, what? Okay. Like
If
when
you
you just
saw
box
Iowa
score look.
putting up 42, raise your hand. It wasn't me. It was not me.
So Iowa UCLA is tonight. Tomorrow we have Purdue at Ohio State. Buckeyes favored by 38, Sam.
Not enough. Honestly, and you know what? I may be absolutely wrong. Maybe Purdue plays a decent game like they did against Illinois, and they only lose by 17, 21 points, whatever. The way the defense for Ohio State's playing, I don't see Purdue hanging with them very long.
Fair enough. That's
and
it's
I don't
good
think
analysis.
38's enough. I don't think 38's enough.
I like just the simple not enough. Like that's good analysis. You know what?
And the over-under is 53.5, and it's minus 38 for Ohio State. You tell me what they think's going to happen. Goodness.
Minnesota goes to Rutgers. We talk about programs that are going up and some that are going down. Rutgers on a bit of a skid after coming out of the gates pretty strong, and Minnesota has a chance to put up another W here.
Yeah, I don't understand Rutgers. Not
I
that
don't
I
either.
thought they were going to be lights out and just one of the best teams in the conference, but they're sitting at 1-4 in the Big Ten, and they only have 4 losses overall. I did not see them being. I mean, they lost to Nebraska at home. They've lost some games that you just wouldn't think that if they were legit and for real would actually lose. And it's very frustrating because I really like Greg Schiano. I really do.
Mm-hmm.
I like what he does. It's just really unfortunate that they've run into this recent skid. And Minnesota, It's not a week off by any means for Rutgers
No.
at all, having Minnesota come into town.
But that'll be interesting because Rutgers is in a position where they're kind of fighting for postseason eligibility at 4-4. And to your point, Minnesota is not going to be an easy one as that one kicks off at noon tomorrow. Maybe the biggest game of the weekend, I would say, in Big Ten football is Michigan going to number 8 Indiana. I don't know how many more times we're going to throw a program at Indiana and say, here's your test, here, prove it. We
Next
seem
week's
to
their
do.
real test, I
Yeah,
think.
I agree. But like we did it with, we're like, here's Nebraska. Here's Michigan State. Here's Michigan. It's like at some point, I think we just actually have to believe Indiana's actually that good and they're maybe going to be. Honestly, at this point, I'd be surprised if they're not in the college football playoffs. They're sitting at
Yeah,
number 8. Say they beat Michigan, with the assumption they lose to Ohio State,
that's not a bad
win their
loss.
next game. Correct. And win that last game against Purdue, you're sitting at 11-1. You don't have to
That
play in
would
the
be a
Big
bad
Ten championship
loss.
game. Right. Yeah, if they don't keep the old Oaken bucket, then
They don't have it. They have to take it.
yeah, if they don't take the old Oaken bucket, then yeah, it's that would be the most dumpster fire way to end this magical
Oh,
ride it's been for
it would
Indiana this
make
year.
me so happy. It really would. Don't get me wrong. It would absolutely thrill me that let's say they do beat Ohio State. That would be even better for me.
They're
That
11-0.
Indiana comes in. I think yeah, it is. It's at Purdue this year, I believe, and they go into West Lafayette. The number 6 team or whatever they come out as this time, and they just get beat by Purdue. That would be amazing. I'm not holding my breath.
I like the Boilermaker fantasy though. It's
Hey, why not? Hey,
you can dream.
anytime you can just crap all over IU's plans, that is perfect for me as a Purdue fan.
But Michigan goes to Indiana. Indiana's favored by 14.5 points. This is a 3:30 kick Saturday afternoon on CBS.
Dun, dun, dun,
Um,
dun, 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 dun. Sorry.
and like I said, it is one of the best jingles there
Oh
is in
yes,
college football.
yes.
Probably it's got to be the best.
You
I'd
know
vote it number
exactly
one.
what it is. Like
Yeah.
you hear the music, you're like football on CBS. Go watch it.
Well, and that's why I was so excited when CBS ended up with the Big Ten because
Yeah.
forever you listen to SEC or you watch SEC
SEC
football with it.
or the Sun Bowl. That's the only
Right.
two.
Um, but I look, like I said, I thought ahead of Nebraska, we're like, here's a team with the pulse. Let's see what they do. And they destroyed them 56-7. Last week I saw them up close in person. I was on the sideline, and that was something else where Michigan State got out in front for the first time.
10-0.
Indiana was
Ever.
trailing. MSU was up 10-0. And what Indiana did in a turnaround, they end up scoring 47 unanswered to win at 47-10 at Spartan Stadium. And look, from watching that game, my takeaway of this team is this is an unbelievably well coached team. They do not make mistakes. And in talking with Don Fisher, who of course has been with Indiana
Legend.
for forever, right? Like
Yeah,
50
longer
plus
than
years.
I've been alive.
I think it's his 52nd year calling
Yeah.
Indiana football. He had said he doesn't think Indiana's going to go undefeated. He doesn't necessarily subscribe to that belief, but he said whoever Indiana loses to, they're just going to have more talent than Indiana. He goes, that's the only way I could see them losing. If you have comparable talent, I don't think you win that game. He goes, I just don't believe they'll be outcoached. I don't believe Indiana's going to make mistakes self-inflicting themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's just not how this is going. And we have 9 games as a data sample for it. If Indiana's going to lose, it's going to be a team that's much more talented than them. And after watching it in person, 100% cosign. I think he is spot on with that.
I think, and I know I don't disagree. By the way, I had a point that I know I'm going to forget if I don't say it right now. I think it was completely 100% a beneficial game for IU to play against Michigan State the other day because they were down by more than one score. It was the first time that they'd been down, period, all year.
Yep.
But they were they were part of a game where they had to come back, and
And they didn't blink.
they didn't blink, they didn't fold up, they didn't do anything that was. They did exactly what they should have done. You know, they kept doing what they do best, and that's what they gained from. Granted, it was beneficial that it was against somebody like Michigan State.
Mm-hmm.
That's not demeaning to what Michigan State is this year. They're markedly better than what they were last year. But still a team that struggles to put the ball in the end zone when they get in the red zone. They are mistake prone. So therefore, IU was able to play their game and see how it is to fight from behind. They did it in flying colors. Like they passed that test, which is nothing but beneficial for them going forward whenever they do fall behind.
No, I think you're spot on. And in terms of Michigan State, they have a bye week this week. But for Michigan State, they have 3 games left. We talk about some of the programs that are fighting for postseason eligibility.
Yeah.
In year one of Jonathan Smith's tenure at Michigan State, they have 3 games left. They got to win 2 to make it to a bowl game. The following week, so next week, they're at Illinois. It's not terribly easy. Then they host
Doable,
Purdue
though.
on a Friday night. It is winnable, but it's not easy.
Right.
The following week, they host Purdue on a Friday night, November 22nd. That was a W that
Correct.
Sam just chalked off for Michigan State. And then the finish of the regular season is hosting Rutgers. So there is an opportunity to get those 2 wins and make a bowl game for Michigan State. And honestly, like talking with some different fans of Michigan State, the conversations have been interesting because fans have felt frustrated here in recent weeks. And you kind of understand, right? Like you lose the Michigan game in a game that Michigan State feels was winnable. Honestly, after watching the first couple of drives, I thought Michigan State was the better team. They didn't take advantage of certain things, and they end up losing that game. That part's frustrating. There's been a couple of frustrating games like that. Boston College earlier in the year. That was a winnable game, a game you probably should have won.
Right.
You end up losing it. So, like, frustrations exist because you've seen that there were opportunities that didn't get banked in on. But overall, if you told me before the season, Michigan State this year was 61 new players, will go 6-6, make a bowl game in Jonathan Smith's first year and trying to rebuild the program, something I think you would have signed up for. And they still have the capability to do that this season.
And they've got a better route to that than others. Like we were just going over Rutgers' remaining games or UCLA's remaining games, and I think that Michigan State has a winnable route, an easier route. Let's say it that way, because while they can win them, they can certainly probably lay an egg and lose them as well. You just don't anticipate that, just like we don't anticipate necessarily UCLA running away with 3 out of 4, but possible. The one thing that you always fall back on with the shortcomings that they've had is they still got a really young quarterback who shows great promise, but he's 18 years old, 19 years old. He's running a D1 Power 4 conference offense as a teenager. That's only going to get better, and that's only going to make Michigan State that much more lethal down the road.
I agree completely. So that'll be interesting to watch how it develops over the next few weeks. Other games happening this weekend. Number 1, Oregon hosts Maryland. We can skip by that one. Number 6, Penn State hosts Washington. That's an 8:00 kick. I think Penn State wins that game. Do you have anything of the contrary?
No, I think they take out their frustrations on Washington. I don't know that they blow them out necessarily by 30, but I think they take their frustrations out on them offensively and try to make things happen, make things work the way they've been doing it all year, and then hit a wall against Ohio State last week.
No, I completely agree. Since we have a little bit of time here, do we want to switch to basketball, Sam?
There's a statement that I normally say that's not PG enough to say, but does a bear go potty in the woods?
Fair enough. We'll take the resounding yes.
Yes.
Um, okay, so basketball is underway. Got tipped off earlier this week. Gosh, this has been a long week. I thought this was a couple weeks ago we tipped off the
Yeah.
season.
No
Yeah.
kidding.
Okay, so it's we tipped off this week. Early on, are there any observations that you have of Big Ten teams right now, Sam?
Obviously, I have a rooting interest in Purdue,
Uh-huh.
and what I saw from Braden Smith is while he's going to miss Zach Edey, I think he's going to be every bit of productive and just as good. Um, the other night against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, he had
Mm-hmm.
12 points, 7 rebounds and or 7 assists and 4 rebounds. I mean, he's still producing at a clip. Now, don't get me wrong, 12 points not great, but in their super secret exhibition against Creighton, he scored
Oh,
31.
and I'm sorry, I have the box score here. I just want to make sure that we give
Was I
Braden the
incorrect?
12 points is right, but 15 assists he had
Oh,
in 8
15, that's right.
rebounds.
And yeah, he was darn near a triple double.
Yes,
And the now again, it does not hurt that he's got 2 7+ footers and Trey Kaufman Wren
correct.
to throw it up to for a quick little dunk. But that's a different dichotomy that they've got without Zach Edey in there. He's not the 305-7-4 presence that Purdue's been used to and that Braden Smith's been able to fall back on. But Daniel Jacobson and Will Berg, 7+ footers that just make it unfair almost sometimes to try to defend against when you've got somebody like Braden Smith.
And the big thing I would say, because it's interesting, like looking through the box score. So Braden Smith only shot it 6 times. Now, a
Yeah.
big part of that is he's the guy, right? So defenses are going to look to contain him a bit. TKR, Trey Kaufman Wren led the team in shot attempts. He had 12. Lawyer had 10. But here's what's interesting and stood out to me, Sam. If Purdue's going to have success, if they're going to legitimately compete for the Big Ten Conference Championship, which I think is in the cards. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's in play. Purdue had 55 field goal attempts in this game. Texas A&M Corpus Christi had 67. So that team got 12 more looks at the basket. And you might be asking why? Was Purdue just at the free throw line?
Offensive
Purdue only shot
rebounds.
Purdue only shot 7 more free throws. Corpus Christi had 7 offensive rebounds. Purdue had 10, but turnovers.
Yes.
Purdue had 16 turnovers. Corpus Christi had 9.
Mm-hmm.
Braden Smith had 6 of those
Yep.
16 Purdue turnovers. That's one of those areas that, look, there's a lot of pressure on him. He's being asked to do a lot and handle a lot, especially from the point guard spot. But you can't, especially against a competition like Texas A&M Corpus Christi, like we're seeing so many teams play against those types of teams here early in the season. You can't be giving away possessions like that. I think that's a big thing to clean up, but it is also the opening game, and there is room to
That's
clean up.
and that's what I was going to get at was, we talked about Oregon and what's wrong with Oregon this football season when they struggled with Idaho and then
Right.
needed a last second field goal to beat Boise State. I think that's working into how the system's going to work for certain players. And I think, year one after Edie,
Yep.
you've got a lot of readjustments to do, and you don't get that chance until you're on the court against somebody different than you.
Yep.
And so I think I would much rather have him have 6 turnovers against Texas A&M Corpus Christi than against Illinois on a Tuesday night in the Big Ten. And
Yep.
I'm not saying that he won't have that. I'm not at all saying that he's not going to be prone to that. But at the same time, if there's a time that you wanted him to have that issue, it's right now to where he's getting into the flow of, okay, this is what I need to do. Zach's not there anymore. I've got these things to do. I think you'll see him clean that up a lot more. But you're right. He's the guy, so they're going to throw a lot more different looks at him that he's going to have to adjust to. And I asked him at media day, how do you go from being the liability your first year to maybe still question marking that liability last year to this year you're one of the best backcourts in the country considered. How do you do that? And he said we got to do what we do best. It's not we don't have Zach there anymore. We've got to work on making sure that we run within our system and run as efficiently as we possibly can. And I think with a guy that has a chip on his shoulder, which he even talked about that during media day, is let him talk. Let him talk.
Mhm.
That drives me. So I think if anything, he's going to improve out of spite at the very least.
No, I'd say it's completely fair. And to round out that conversation, no in degree is this hitting a panic button on
Oh no,
Purdue, but
right.
it is just pointing out some of the things
It's an
that they
observation
have to
that needs
improve.
to be observed.
You're right.
There is room. They're not a perfect team, and good lord, there's people that think they're going to be a dumpster fire this year. No news to them, they're not going to be. They're going to be pretty darn good.
Well, and again, with the context that we've talked about before, but I don't think we've said it or established it here in this conversation. The Big Ten this year, there isn't a team that's head and shoulders above anybody.
Right.
Like, look, the highest ranked team is Purdue, right? At
Uh huh.
14th in the
Right.
country. Like, we're not talking about necessarily any of these programs being elite this season. There is no Purdue of the
Right.
last couple of years. There is
Right.
no of the Michigan States during the Cassius Winston years. So it's
Although you mentioned Cassius Winston, did you see the graphic that had Magic, Braden Smith, and Cassius Winston on it?
that was stunning to me to see
Through the
that
first
graphic.
2 years of their careers, Braden Smith ranks in between both of those guys.
Which is just wild.
Now,
Wild.
granted, a lot of that had to do with the fact that you had 7'4", 300 pounds in the middle. But I think you have to, you can't just put anybody into a system and make that work. So
Right.
I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Oh, I agree. Well, and he still had 15 assists in last night, and there was no
Yeah,
Zach Edey. Not
right,
last night, but Monday night.
right,
Um, so yeah, nonetheless, that was pretty staggering to see.
yeah,
Um, Other teams, I thought Illinois' Will Riley, the freshman, comes in and drops 31 points in his opener.
yeah.
That was pretty attention grabbing from the get go. I think Illinois is going to be a legitimate player in this
I
conference
do
title
too.
hunt.
I do too. I like Brad Underwood. I love his coaching. People say he yells too much. You know what? I look like when I was coaching, people thought I yelled all the time. But if you can hear my voice, I've got a really deep voice. So if I elevate the volume at all, it sounds like I'm yelling. And
Right.
now, don't get me wrong, he's got the looks with it as well. But I love Brad Underwood. I really do. I like his coaching, uh, and he brings in players. It's pretty simple. He brings in players that can just dudes that can play ball. And I think you're right. I think Illinois, after watching them, not taking anything away from IU as much as I want to, I think Illinois is probably your number 2 team to me behind Purdue.
Well, and I tell you what, too, if we talk about honestly, there's only been one maybe only one Power 4 game played by a Big Ten team so far, and that was
Ohio State.
Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
and they beat number 19 Texas on opening night. What Jake Diebler has cooking up in Columbus has me a bit intrigued too. I think Ohio State might be able to kind of be one of those outsiders, maybe from
Yep.
that tier one, that can really make a push and maybe decide if they don't win it, decide who does win it in this Big Ten
I
conference.
agree, and I really like Jake Diebler. I talked to him on media days and asked about the process of how he kept his recruits and b the roster, the ones that he needed. And he said I had one-on-one conversations with every one of those guys to tell them that, look, this is what we're planning on doing, and this is what we want to do, and this is what we feel like uh, is going to make us successful. And he got the guys that wanted to stay bought into that. And when you have guys that choose to stay after there's a coaching change, means they're on board with what you've got cooking. And I really like Jake Diebler. I really do.
I do too. And it's funny too. I pulled up the box score. Bruce Thornton had a great game 20 points, 5 boards, 5 assists, went 7 of 10 from the floor. Micah Parrish had 17 points, 6 boards, 5 assists for him. But Aaron Bradshaw, one of the highly touted transfers that he got in the portal from Kentucky, only 2 points in that game, 4 fouls. Michi Johnson, who came back from South Carolina to Ohio State, only 6 points in this game. So you had two of your more talented players not even play up to their full potential or capability in any means, really. And you still pulled off a win against number 19 Texas. That goes to show me a lot too about what Ohio State is. Um, from there, Indiana so far has kind of been what we expected. I mean, it's a lot of talent for teams to handle there in Bloomington. When you look at the front court of Malik Renew, Umar Ballo, and Mackenzie Mbako, On Wednesday night, they beat SIUE. And on that night, Mbako had 31 points, 9 rebounds. Balo had 15 points, 6 rebounds. Renew had 15 points, 7 rebounds. All three of them started too. So Woodson is going with the logjam in there, but it also was extremely productive. Like, it's hard to argue.
Well, the one thing I ask is what happens when you get against a running team? Do you still start those three and force them to play against them, or
I'm
do
curious too.
you make adjustments? Now, I know against and I'm going to go back to Purdue just for this aspect of their starting lineup against Creighton wasn't a normal starting lineup. He was,
Mhm.
a lot of times in these early goings, you try things to see what it's like, and maybe that's what Woodson's doing against SIU, Edwardsville. Is let's put these guys in and see what happens and see how we
Yeah,
can coexist. But that's also a team that they are markedly better than. They have way more talent than SIUE, and it'll be interesting to see what IU does when they get against somebody that has more athleticism in their starting lineup. What adjustments do you make against them?
I agree. I agree 100%. But it is amazing when you look at
Yeah, it
those
is.
those three combined for 61 points and 22 rebounds.
Did they
Like,
outscore SIU? E?
tied them. That is awesome. Yeah, and Mackenzie Mbako in this game, he went four. So he scores the 31 points, right? He went 4 for 5 from 3-point range. Like,
He's got some. Hey, I don't know if you noticed. I'm going to run back to. I don't know if you've noticed any or seen any highlights or anything, but Zach Edey's hit multiple threes in the NBA. Just saying.
yeah, no, you're right. He's
He's got more range than people were giving him credit for.
correct. Well, and the big thing with Edie too is the first game he had a hard time with fouls, and
Yes.
it's funny too because I remember coming from the Michigan State perspective when one of his now teammates got into the NBA. Jaron Jackson Jr. had some struggles with just
Same
staying on the
issues.
floor because of foul trouble. So if Edie can find out how to stay out of the foul trouble, I think Memphis really has something
Well,
there.
I noticed or I saw a post that there's only two people in the NBA history in their uh, rookie season, maybe even within the first amount of games, I'm not sure, with 25 points, 25 plus points, 12 rebounds, 4 blocks, and 90% shooting, and it was him and Akeem Olajuwon. So I'm
Now,
not saying he's going to necessarily be the Hall of Famer and the great that Hakeem was and is, but I don't think he's just tall, kids. He's not just tall.
I'd say that's fair. Um,
But
it's
let's get
I
back
actually
to college now.
Well, the last point I'll make is I need to
Yeah,
watch a Grizzlies game because what's funny to me is it seems so contrasting of styles to have Ja Morant, like one of the fastest players in the league, paired with Zach Edey, but things are working so far. I just haven't watched a game yet to know how it's all working.
I haven't seen a game, but I've seen highlights, and I think Ja likes the fact that he's got that big presence in there because, excuse me, you can't necessarily double on Ja with that guy that's guarding him, but yet if Ja gets in trouble, just throw it up there and see what happens,
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, and that's like Zach's a great solution in the half court. I feel like Ja likes to run. So,
Oh yeah, and the nice thing about that is what from what I've seen is when Ja runs, Zach's a trailer. So if he
yeah,
runs into any issue, he can just feed it as he's coming down the
coming down.
lane, and he doesn't have to jump very high to dunk it. So,
Sure.
uh,
But okay, so if we get back to college, the other
yes,
team we could touch on real quick before we switch over to women's, because there's a couple of things going on with Big Ten women's
yeah,
basketball. Um, with the men, Michigan State, another one of those teams that people were trying to figure out maybe what they were.
yep.
Both of their games so far have been pretty
Lopsided.
similar,
Oh,
excuse me, where it's been close into the second half for a stretch, and then they just break the game open.
mm-hmm.
And it usually happens with a lot of fast break points, kind of Michigan State style, where they start to break things open. But in game one, we saw Jaden Akins kind of take the reins on scoring. He dropped in 23 points, tied a career high. In game two, Jackson Kohler took over with 20 points, 12 rebounds, a huge night for him. I think as Michigan State's getting into this year, I think a lot about what they are this year reminds me of last year in ways. I think if they're going to be successful, it's going to be you need Akins to be a guy who can give you 20 on any given night.
Yeah.
Like Akins is going to have to average high teens. And it's great that he started off so strong. I think he had 10 last night as well in that win. During the summer, he went through a bit of a shooting slump. So if he stays kind of consistent and one of the dependable scores for Michigan State, they really got something there. And if Kohler emerges as that five, like if he continues on that plane, things can change a little bit for Michigan State and what their potential is. That could be really interesting.
Well, and they've been kind of on the cusp and outside. I've seen a lot of power rankings
Yeah.
and predictions. They're like at 5 or 6.
Yep.
That's just going off of what you know they have and what you know from the past. We all know we don't work in the past. It's what's happening now. And if they've got that figured out to a certain extent, yeah, they're going to be at the top 3, top 2, vying for a Big Ten championship, as we're so accustomed to seeing from a Tom Izzo team.
Yeah. And it can't be said enough. Cohen Carr, like the energy he brings on the floor, obviously he's the best dunker in the Big Ten. There isn't a debate around that. But the energy he's bringing on the floor in any kind of way, I think he's going to be the X factor for Michigan State in a lot of different ways. Usually when the Spartans get out and they break these 2 games open, Carr's on the floor.
Yeah.
He's been doing a wonderful job. And somebody to keep an eye on, Jace Richardson, the son of Jason Richardson, as a freshman, he might vie if he gets enough minutes throughout this season. He might be on the All Big Ten freshman team at year's end. He has been unbelievably impressive through 2 games.
And both him and his dad played for Tom Izzo.
Isn't that crazy? Just wild. Real quick on the women's side.
Yeah.
Last night was an eventful night. Illinois upset number 20 Florida State. Big win for the Illini.
Illinois is the anomaly because you remember 2 seasons ago they were made the tournament for the first time. You thought had big ambitions for them last year, and they kind of laid an egg.
Yeah.
Is that the sophomore slump?
Honestly, it's kind of hard to explain. Like, honestly, it still is an enigma. I don't have an answer, but they have so many of those players back again.
Right.
And so that's what a lot of people last year preseason were expecting them to do pretty well because they had so many of those players, and things kind of went flat. And now this year, those players are still there, and you're kind of sitting there, you're like, well, I know what you all are capable of.
Right.
Is this going to be a year where it happens? But so they pick up a huge win over number 20 Florida State. Meanwhile, number 25 Indiana last night loses to Harvard in overtime in what was a thrilling game.
At home.
At home.
At home. That's and you know what? I fully intend to see Harvard probably in the NCAA tournament, probably, because normally you don't get those unless IU is just not a 25th ranked team this year right now. They've lost a ton, but still.
They have lost a ton, and it's important context because they lose Sarah Scalia, who was their sharpshooter from a year ago, but Mackenzie Holmes, their all-time leading scorer there in the post, is gone now too, and graduated. And to your point, I think Indiana's capable of being a top 25 team, but I would say after watching that game last night, they're not now because Indiana had 27 turnovers in this game. Like it's so self-inflicted that again, they have enough talent. I like what they brought with Shea Chesky coming in, Yarden Garzone's back, Chloe Moore McNeil running the point. I think they have enough talent where they could be a top 25 team, could push to be a top 5 team in the Big Ten Conference. But given what we just saw last night with 27 turnovers, they're just not there yet, which again is okay, right?
They're trying to find their legs because they've lost big pieces. They've got to figure out their identity.
Yeah. So that part's really interesting. It should be interesting to watch moving forward. Michigan women's basketball on opening night pushed South Carolina into the fourth quarter. I mean, Michigan was leading this game, I think, at halftime, and South Carolina, I think, took a lead as they started the fourth quarter by like 2 or 3 points. It was something like that, but this was a game all the way through the fourth quarter. Swords, the freshman, Shyla Swords from Michigan, This is a name to get to know now. She went against some of the very best in South Carolina and put up a career day in her debut. You would imagine, like let me see how many she had.
Michigan was down by 3 going into the fourth and only got
Down
outscored
by
by
3.
3 in the fourth. So it was a very competitive game throughout the entire game.
Swords of freshman going against the number 1 team in the country, 27 points, 12 rebounds in her first collegiate
Wow.
game. Like it's insane what
Mm-hmm.
Silas Swords did. I think I said Shyla earlier, so let me
Yeah,
correct that.
that's
Sila,
okay.
Silas Swords. But nonetheless, maybe Michigan is a little bit more than was previously expected. They were expected to maybe be that 12th team in the Big Ten heading into the year. And for context for listeners, everybody kind of thought USC, UCLA, Ohio State, 1, 2, 3. And then after that, maybe you go Maryland, maybe you go Indiana, Illinois, Nebraska, Michigan State. Um, I know I'm missing somewhere Iowa, um, all kind of being that 4 through 9. A lot of people had Minnesota at 10 and then felt pretty good about Michigan being at 11 or 12. But if Michigan's going to play like this throughout the year, the Big Ten Women's Basketball Conference might just put in 11 teams into this NCAA tournament.
Unbelievable.
I mean, it's insane. It's going to be a gauntlet this year. And since, of course, I cover Michigan State women's basketball, I'll talk about what they did on opening night, where they won
Yeah.
by 65 points.
Yeah.
They
They
win
did okay. They
they
did
win
all right.
against Oakland 107-42. 6 different Spartans had double figures. 13 of the 14 active players scored. But the biggest thing on this one is they forced in this game, I believe it was, I'm going off the top of my head here, but I believe it was 33 turnovers.
I'll look
Um,
while you're talking. I'll look.
yeah, I believe they forced 33 turnovers
33.
and 33. And so I believe they also had 29 steals or 22 steals to kind
Wow.
of help result in those 33
Yeah.
turnovers. And yes, they did. That's how Robin Fralick wants to play ball. Like it wasn't just last year because of the injuries and the lack of depth that they played full court pressing, fast tempo. That's how Robin Fralick wants to play basketball. So
No matter
this
who's in the
is what you're
lineup, she
going to
wants to
see.
run it.
Well, and you can see by the addition she's made to the team,
Mm-hmm.
like they didn't necessarily go out and just get the back to the basket 5 player, and that kind of slows things down. They got players of the same uh, silk or mold. They're just longer. I mean, they're longer, but still just as fast. That's how they want to play ball in East Lansing, and it's
Eight
obviously it's a lot of fun to watch.
8 players with at least 8 points.
I mean, it really is insane. They
Yeah.
had 29 assists in the game, did Michigan
Yeah.
State, and Oakland didn't hit a single 3-pointer. So they're getting it done defensively first and just kind of breaking out from there, and that's where they get to 107 points. It's kind
I
of hard to
think
say that your
Oakland could have
defense
hit all
hurts.
17 of their threes and still lost by 15, 20 points. So it really doesn't matter.
It is crazy. But yeah, no, it's pretty exciting what's going on there. And of course, Michigan State's back in action tonight. They'll be taking on Yale in another non-conference game.
Watch out for the Ivy League, buddy.
That's Hartford already made a statement, so
Don't
let's
don't
see.
let Yale have let's let Harvard have the bragging rights over Big Ten opponents. Okay,
Yeah,
so beat Yale up, and then just let Harvard and Yale fight over the fact that Harvard was the only one able to win. So
that'd be great. All right, well, that'll do it for another edition of Big Talk. Before we fully close out the door, Sam, do you want to let everybody know where they can find us?
absolutely on the TikToks, Instagram, and the platform formerly known as Twitter, we are at B1G_talk. That's B1G, not BIG. And then you go to Facebook, B1G Talk, Big Talk. Yes, we are number one. Yes. And then every week on the ASAP Network, as well as the Lounge Media Group webpage, soon to be the Lounge Sports Network, will be broadcasting these as well. But then later in the day, through the Lounge Media Group Productions, it'll be ready for your listening pleasure. Or if you have to watch us, go to Spotify and find the video stream there.
All right. Well, and with this last piece of news, all of those promotions still stand intact. I mean, this
Correct.
this is not necessarily deal breaking of what's going on with the show, but uh, it's kind of bittersweet. Sam and I were talking about before this and leading up to it. I've had just a lot of more responsibilities with my day job, my 9 to 5. If you call it 9 to 5, I mean, it's kind of around the clock. But anyways,
9 to 5. Use
you're
the air
right.
quotes.
So this will actually be my last episode as the host of Big Talk. It has been a pleasure. I've done this, what, 3 years now or so?
140 shows, and that's just 40
140
weeks.
shows.
That's 140 weeks because there was a time that we did two shows a week. Now, you haven't been here for all of them because you've been very, very busy
Yeah.
with what you do on your day job. But for a glaring majority of those 140 weeks, we've been able to share a Friday morning and talk about Big Ten sports.
It has been a lot of fun. I told Sam I can't thank him enough for asking me to be a part of this years ago and doing all the hard work because everything, the way that you're even able to see it, Sam literally does all the work behind everything. I just kind of show up and talk. So I'm really grateful to Sam for all the help throughout the time, and I'm really grateful to all the listeners who have chimed in with all their conversations, all their comments throughout the years, and just for giving us a listen and letting us be a part of your lives on a weekly basis to talk Big Ten sports as well. So it's bittersweet. Got a lot of good things for myself personally on the horizon that I'm really excited about and looking
Yeah.
forward to. And I won't be a total stranger. And anytime Sam decides that he wants me to parachute in, I'll parachute in every once in a
How
while as
about
a
next
guest.
week?
Yeah, that might just defeat the purpose. But no, like I've had just a wonderful time here with Big Talk and working with you, Sam, and
Yeah.
with all the listeners. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, and I've really appreciated being a part of everybody's lives for the last or the better part of 140 weeks.
Well, I want to thank you for having the confidence in me to be able to put together a show that we talk about our passions, and you've helped me grow in my coverage in the aspect of instead of worrying about just my team, follow more than just my team. It helps me be a better fan, but then also helps me be a better co-host of a show that talks about the entire Big Ten rather than just one team. And I will always and still to this day have told people there's no harder working person than you that I know of in this job. The fact that you could tell me about the backup quarterback or the third string quarterback of Illinois, is just and yes, it's a laughable thing, but at the same time, you do your job to that extent. And
Yeah.
for us to have been lucky enough to have you for the 140 weeks for Big Talk and seen it grow from Big Ten +4 to Big Ten +8, which is why we
Right.
have Big Talk. That's been an honor to work with you this long, and we're not closing the door on it because I would love for something to open up to where you're, hey, I can come back now if you want me, because
Right.
we'll go with a triumvirate if we need to, or we'll make adjustments to where you're welcome back anytime.
I appreciate it. It's been an honor to be with you as well. And like I said at the beginning of this little monologue, this isn't the end for Big Talk. Sam's going to
Sure,
continue on. The show is going to continue on. This is just an end of me consistently being here on a week to week basis. So
correct.
still look out for Big Talk.
Yep.
Still support and be a part of the show. Be a part of this community. Always love having all of you there. So
Well,
with all that,
I'm pretty
go ahead.
sure we're gonna look at maybe seeing if Tony can fill in until we can find a full time fill. It may be Tony, but I
Yeah.
think for now at least we'll probably tap him and see if he can do those fill in spots until we can find a suitable replacement, not an equal replacement, but a suitable replacement to the show.
As always, Sam's just way too kind. But well, with that being said, like I said, it's been a journey. It's been a lot of fun. Certainly appreciate all of you. And for one final time for me, we'll close out this edition of Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. For my friend Sam Sprunger, I'm Dalton Shetler. So long, everybody.